Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Thank you so much for being here. We've got some more developments on the Declaration Act. Talk about the latest maneuvers by Premier David Eby there. We have his majority government at risk with an MLA who has a serious health issue. We're going to talk about the future of that as well. And booze ban. The Americans upset about provinces continuing to ban U.S. liquor from the store shelves. Is that a great tactic? Should BC continue? The Premier says yes. We're going to get into that as well. To do it all, as we do each and every week, we're going to bring in the pod squad. Angelo, Isidorou, Jillian, Oliver, Jeff Ferrier. Thank you so much for being here and each and every week. Let's get into it. DRIPA, again, every week, DRIPA. It just keeps giving us new developments. This week, the Premier announcing on Monday he's not proceeding with anything with DRIPA this session. We had thought originally he was going to amend DRIPA, then he was going to suspend it, then there was going to be a confidence issue, then it's a non-confidence issue, then here we are now with a delay for discussions with First Nations until the fall. So let's start there. This move by the Premier, a delay and continued conversation. Jillian, what do you think of the Premier ending up in this spot here? This appears to be his final decision on DRIPA for this session. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not surprising. We talked about last week the sort of genesis of DRIPA. You know, it's an NDP initiative, one they were really proud of in their first term of forming government after 16 years. And I think it's not surprising to see so much pushback in caucus to essentially striking it down. And I think he was also in danger of just leaving nobody happy. You know, First Nations weren't going to be happy with essentially shelving it. His caucus wasn't going to be happy with that either. And the Conservatives were still going to continue to push for a full repeal. So I think this way, at least it gets them back onto their principles, and he's delegating it to his Attorney General to try to kind of reach an agreement. And we'll see what they can come up with. I think that it's clear probably, you know, for both, you know, First Nations groups and for the government that the status quo isn't working and that they need to provide some more clarity on where this is heading. So we'll see where they get to in the fall. Yeah, I mean, nobody knows where they can get to because they seem so far apart in a way. You've got First Nations leaders say, don't change this. The Premier saying, we got to change something. And now they're going to talk some more about it. Angelo, do you see a path here? What do you think of this move by the Premier to keep talking?
Well, I think the best line of the week goes to Vaughn Palmer during Eby's scrum when Eby said, I would have liked to have gotten this right the first time. And Vaughn Palmer said, what about the fifth? I think that it's a chaotic position to be in as the Premier. And we're noticing a pattern where Eby comes out and says, we are doing X. Then either a lobby group or his caucus or the general public react negatively or certainly react in such a way where they were not consulted. And he backs off. It's an odd pattern to repeat multiple times, especially in such a short amount of time. And that's what we saw here. We sort of were told very briefly that we were actually going to see something tabled on that Monday, and then he walked that back. So, you know, to your question of where did he go from here? I mean, certainly we're not going to see anything this session, but this problem isn't going to go away. It's arguably not even going to go away even if you repealed DRIPA, which of course Conservatives advocate for. That is not the ultimate fix to this problem. But the longer we don't do anything, the more issues it'll create for the province and for uncertainty around land rights.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, what do you think?
I think stepping back from the precipice was the right call. I had an opportunity to be interviewed by the Vancouver Sun on this week, and I described the move as a cold plunge in an ice bath to try and extinguish.
You do like your cold plunges. You do like
they're good for you. They send endorphins through your body and help you in all sorts of good ways. But this is like an ice bath for the government to put out a flaming hot political issue. I think that's what's been accomplished between government and First Nations, at least in the the short term. I think it gives the government a chance to regroup, to get the parties sitting down at a table to try and negotiate a way out of a really complex situation in a way that hopefully balances people's private property rights and the inherent rights of First Nations.
I'm going to put a question out here because it was something the Premier said last week, and actually in response to one of my questions. So I'm going to double question myself and feed the question around. But the question is, should First Nations leaders be compromising on the issue of DRIPA because of where the public is at, because of the legal uncertainty, because of the position that we're in? And the Premier said last week he didn't think the First Nations Leadership Council was willing to move on this, that he had met a wall with them. And then there was this sort of reaction from First Nations leaders saying, we don't need to move at all on this issue. And let's go around on that, because if the two parties are talking now, and we bought the province multiple months of this space to speak, do First Nations leaders need to meet the government at a different position than don't touch DRIPA? Do we think that that's sort of the environment that we're in? Jeff, I'll stay with you on this one. Is that part of what is going to be needed here in order for government to get out of this situation, do you think?
Yeah, I think everyone's going to need to find a way to compromise on this. It's the only way you can come together when you have such complex problems and disparate views. And I think you do that by what the premiers sought to do here, which is to focus on building relationships, repairing relationships. So, a few months ago, Angelo and I didn't know one another. So if we were in the green room at the CHEK world headquarters deciding what to watch on TV, I probably wouldn't have agreed with his suggestion that we tune into Desperate Housewives. But now that I've spent time with Angelo, got to know him, built a bit of relationship, maybe I'd give his TV choices a chance here. Look, government has got to focus on the relationship with First Nations. Everyone's got to compromise. Everyone's got to focus on rebuilding that trust. And that's the only way we're going to find a solution and a way forward through this.
What do you think, Angelo? Besides the Desperate Housewives dig there, what do you think? Do First Nations need to move off of their position as for this to work? And their response has been, this is a human rights issue for us, and we don't move off of human rights, and we're not willing to move at all to meet the Premier in this moment.
Well, I'm glad that Jeff is on board with Desperate Housewives, first of all. But to your point, I think when you deal with public policy, it's always ideal to have the general public with you, because then that motivates politicians and elected bodies to be with you. And I think if you're First Nations, you do need to come to, I think, a new understanding and a new realization that the general public, for multivarious reasons, is not exactly where you are on this subject. That you may argue that the intent of DRIPA was not to create uncertainty about private property, but certainly the court outcomes have created that uncertainty. So I think that for First Nations, if I was among them and if I was sort of in those councils, I would be very concerned about what is the downstream effect of this level of division. Does this end up getting worse? Does the general public begin to turn more and more and more to the point where you lose more than what you had to begin with? I think compromise is very important. I think it's probably a part of reconciliation, is how do we come to the table here and realize we all live here, we share this land, we all call this land home, we're all Canadians and British Columbians. So how are we going to actually achieve reconciliation? That needs to be part of the conversation too, of what does that actually look like? What does it actually look like are we ever done? Are we ever done achieving that reconciliation? I think it's really that people put their swords down and come to that mature realization.
Yeah, it is interesting also, Jillian, that Emily Lowen, the BC Green leader, had an op-ed with Grand Chief Stuart Phillip in the Vancouver Sun, basically saying, leave DRIPA alone, like lean in to DRIPA the way it is, which is not a movement from a leading First Nations leader to compromise. It doesn't look like on DRIPA, but how do you view what needs to happen here?
Yeah, I think that was a pretty clear signal from Chief Stuart Phillip that, if there is a huge compromise and an abandonment of DRIPA, they're going to put their political support elsewhere. In the past, First Nations have been quite supportive of the NDP. But I think, they view this as a pretty hard line. I think the most important thing that could come out of the negotiations this summer is some sort of broad, very clear agreement on the protection of private property rights. To me, I think that uncertainty is sort of like the third rail of this on this issue. Individual chiefs that have been involved in the sort of recent court decisions that have raised concerns about this have been really clear that they're not going after private property. And so I think that should be something that is achievable, and it's not something that's specifically being touched on in DRIPA. But when we see treaties negotiated since DRIPA, that is something that has been agreed on, like in the agreement with the HIDA. So I think that if we could get clarity for that for the public, then that would really take a lot of the heat out of the issue and help us continue to move forward with reconciliation, which is what I think, most people want to see. The thing that's going to be harder is, what do we do with the 95% of the rest of the province, which is Crown land? I don't see the province and First Nations coming to a very super clear agreement about a path forward on that. But I think, dealing with the private property issue first and being really, really clear with the public that that's off the table as we move forward with UNDRIP and its implementation is sort of the first order of business.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. If they could take the heat out of that issue, they might be creating space to talk about other issues. Okay, let's take a quick break here. Coming up after this, we're going to talk about the majority situation for the Eby government. It seems precarious right now. We'll get into that coming up after this. Welcome back. Premier David Eby asking the province to pray for the health of Vancouver Mount Pleasant MLA Joan Phillip this week, who is suffering a unspecified but very serious health issues. She was in hospital in grave condition. She is unable to vote as of now, according to New Democrats, which, as we might know from the math since the election, a one-seat majority for the Eby government minus one MLA being able to vote is not a majority government. So we're going to talk a bit about that, bringing the pod squad back in. Angelo, let's start with you on this. If the Eby government doesn't have the votes due to Joan Phillip's health, what does it mean for the rest of this session, and what could potentially happen here, do you think, with that situation?
Well, obviously our hearts and our prayers go out to Joan and her family. It's very unfortunate news. What does it mean for the government? Well, it means instability. I mean, already at 47, already at 47 seats, it's difficult to govern. But at 46, potentially, it creates a lot of difficulty for the Eby government to pass legislation. We know, and unless I'm mistaken, and one of you can correct me if I'm wrong, the only true confidence motion we have coming up is the budget, which is at the end of May. Mm-hmm. So I do wonder whether legislation is pulled, or if we try to sort of slow roll things as much as possible until then. But I think Eby is probably trying to make some phone calls to other members in the chamber to ensure that he has that confidence for the budget. And then going forward from there, we go into a very uncertain period, depending on what the outcome is.
Mm-hmm. And depending on the health of Joan as well. Jeff, what do you think it means for the government? Could it lose some votes here? Is it willing to lose a vote on, say, the FOI bill? Would it start punting bills off to the fall? Does it need to, it has to pass the budget. So I don't think it could prorogue without passing the budget. But like, what does it mean if it's the Eby government and it doesn't have the votes, do you think?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that the Attorney General told folks yesterday that Joan Phillip's condition is stabilizing. So that's great news. And we all hope that she continues on a positive trajectory. I also heard that she was watching Question Period later in the latter part of this week.
I wouldn't recommend that to anyone.
I was just going to
with
say,
full health.
If you want to get better,
you're patient.
Don't watch. Right. I don't know what doctor prescribed that. So I'm going to assume that she's in good health. And if I'm talking hypothetically that a piano falls from the sky, hits an MLA on the head, like Wile E. Coyote, and kind of pushes them down into the ground so they can't escape. They're still alive. Government has got a lot of things that it can do. It can punt everything to the fall, close down the House, get a by-election happening, hope that the government is successful in that. There's a practice that has been used in legislatures called pairing pairing, which is when a member of one party is ill, someone in another party decides not to vote at the same time, so that the makeup of the legislature is reflected in votes. Governments have for a long time faced challenges, faced difficulties, and there are ways out of this.
Yeah. Okay, Jillian, what do you think?
I mean, I think the math is a reflection of how people voted. The public didn't return a strong majority for a reason. And I think that is because they would like to see, they don't have full trust in any party, and they would, therefore prefer compromise. And the legislature has functioned in a minority in recent terms. I think they can do it again. But yeah, it probably means that some of the more contentious and I would say like sketchy bills like the FOI legislation, where the government is basically trying to make it harder for the public and the media to access information, maybe won't pass. And maybe that's a good thing. And maybe we can, instead focus on things that are of, utmost importance to constituents. The government's got the Greens that they recently had an agreement on, maybe time to rethink their refusal to advance some of those priorities. And they've also got independents. I think, a couple independents like MLA Sturko and Boultby are, been really clear that they're primarily focused on serving the needs of their constituents. So maybe it's a chance to sort of get back to basics and reflect where the public is at and the priorities that they want to see advance this session.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's a live issue. We'll keep on it because it sort of changes day by day, and the votes change day by day, and it creates an element of instability in the legislature for sure. Okay, we'll take our final break here. Coming up next, BC's booze ban on American booze continues despite anger from the Americans on this. We'll get into it coming up after this. Welcome back. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick telling the Senate this week that Canada's ban on American booze from store shelves was outrageous and insulting, suggesting the provinces need to lift that before trade talks can get off the ground between Canada and the United States. Alberta and Saskatchewan have in the past, many months ago, dropped their booze ban, but Ontario's Premier Doug Ford came out and said, no way, keeping it in place, don't trust Donald Trump. And BC Premier David Eby out late in the week saying that booze ban will stay in place until we get a trade deal. And his words here, no if, ands, or bourbons about it. Okay, Ophelia, I like that one. I don't think he got any laughs on that. But let's go around here. Should BC keep the booze ban in place if it's ticking off the Americans? Is that good? Feels like it could be good. Jeff, let's start with you on that.
Yeah, Howard Lutnick can go pound sand. U.S. liquor can go back on the shelves when we have a fair trade deal with them and they stop threatening to take over Canada. Saying that might get me sent to an ICE detention center, but I believe that to be true. Look, Premier Eby's sense is correctly, I think, that British Columbians are worried about the U.S.'s economic and territorial threats directed at all of us. That was the case many months ago when he started to position himself as the strong, stable voice for BC in the face of American threats. I think it remains the case today, especially whenever it pops up like it is on this issue. And I think that's going to resonate with voters who hear it, and I think it's the right position to take.
Angelo, my bourbon supply is getting precariously low, so I'm tempted to take the opposite position here, but probably everyone... What do you think of BC continuing this way with the American reaction?
Well, Howard Lutnick's appearance to the Senate committee is interesting because he got into a sparring match with the senator from New Hampshire who argued that tourism to New Hampshire, which is a border state, is down as a result of this aggression from the U.S. towards our country. Lutnick, in response, discussed how, and I quote, the Canadians suck. So that's at us, I guess.
Very mature and sophisticated. Yes.
Yeah. So I think that the New Hampshire senator, is arguing that it's very difficult to see how we can find an amicable solution if we're insulting other countries. Is there an incredible amount of utility to the booze ban? I'm not sure there is, but beyond that, I'm not sure what else you can do. I think the greatest thing that is going to, frankly, put an end to the trade war is going to come down to November in America when there will be midterms, and it is very likely that Donald Trump will lose control of the Senate and the House in those midterms, and he may be cauterized from there. I think ultimately, Should we be putting American booze back on the shelves? I think we haven't for some time, and it's certainly annoying them. Does annoying this American president get us to a solution? I'm not sure that it does, but certainly we shouldn't be giving in and simply waiting and hoping to be nice and hoping that maybe, he won't annex us. I think that's all rhetoric anyways, but I understand where Doug Ford is coming from and where the premier is currently coming from.
Yeah. Jillian, 1 minute left. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I agree. I think, provinces have so few levers to respond to the trade war, and this is one of them. I think it's important because it gets the Americans' attention and kind of refutes Trump's point that they really don't need us. But it also, just gives people a sense of kind of like agency and control over an issue that's really scary and threatening at a time where I think we need all the unity we can get.
Yeah, it does. That and the travel ban gave people a sense of that they could make a choice here and make an impact in it. And I still think the sort of unofficial suggestion from the government is don't travel to the United States for a holiday if you can avoid it. And you're right. That does give a sort of a sense of agency to people at a frightening time. So my bourbon supply is running low, though, so I'm hoping we get a deal here with Kuzma. But it doesn't sound good from what the president and others have said just in general. It's going to be very rocky, difficult. The talk of Canada having to buy in and offer concessions just to start the talks, which means this may get worse before it gets better, which is politics in a nutshell. But thank you to the panel for being here. Thanks to the Pod Squad. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our audio podcast. We got lots of extras, including political plays of the week. So you want to subscribe to that. And we'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.